They told me the Amityville house was just a building, walls, windows, and wood. They lied. Every creak is a whisper, every shadow a trap. The rules were meant to keep me alive, but the house has learned how to twist them. And now, it's calling my name. Welcome back to the place where nightmares never sleep. Tonight, we step inside the infamous Amityville house, a place bound by rules no human should ever follow. If you've got the courage, stay with me. But remember, once you hear the whispers, it's already too late. I first heard about the caretaker position at the Amityville house through an ad in a local paper. It was a short, almost cryptic posting. No description of the duties, no pictures of the place, just a simple line. Caretaker needed for historic property in Amityville, New York. Generous pay. Call this number. I'd been out of work for months, and the promise of good pay pulled me in before I even considered where exactly this job might be. The man on the phone had a voice like rust. He spoke slowly, enunciating every word as if reading from a script. He didn't tell me much, just that the house required someone to keep it in good order and follow the rules. His last words before giving me the address were the ones that stuck with me. If you can't follow the rules, don't come, not even out of curiosity. When I arrived in Amityville, the day was unnervingly quiet. The streets were lined with bare winter trees, their branches skeletal against a gray sky. I knew the house before I even reached it. Everyone has seen the photos, the infamous Dutch colonial with the two quarter-moon windows that looked like eyes. Up close, the place felt even more unsettling. It wasn't just the stories I'd heard over the years, but the way the air seemed heavier here, as if it carried something invisible that pressed against my skin. The owner, or at least the man I assumed was in charge, was waiting at the front door. His name was Mr. Holloway. Tall, thin, and wearing a black wool coat despite the mild cold, he didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "These," he said, "are the rules. Commit them to memory. Break any of them, and you won't just lose your job. You'll lose more than that." I unfolded the paper right there on the porch. The list was handwritten in small, precise lettering. 1. Never enter the basement after sunset. 2. Never open the attic door, no matter what you hear. 3. Keep all mirrors in the house covered after midnight. 4. If you hear someone calling your name from outside between midnight and 3 a.m., do not respond. 5. Every night, place a glass of water on the dining room table before 11 p.m. Do not remove it until morning. 6. If you see the figure in the hallway, turn off all the lights and close your eyes until it passes. 7. Never sleep in the master bedroom. I looked up from the list, half expecting him to smile or say it was a joke. He didn't. "You'll understand in time," he said, stepping aside for me to enter. The inside of the house was even darker than the outside, despite the daylight leaking through the blinds. Dust clung to the air. The wood floors creaked under every step. The wallpaper was faded, curling at the edges like old skin. Holloway gave me a brief tour, pointing out where cleaning supplies were kept, where to find the fuse box, which rooms to avoid. The basement door was at the end of a narrow hallway. He didn't open it, just tapped it once with his knuckles before moving on. Upstairs, the attic door sat at the top of a steep staircase. The paint around the frame was chipped, as if someone had clawed at it. When we reached the master bedroom, he didn't even step inside. He just stood in the doorway, staring at the bed. "You'll keep this room locked," he said, "and you'll sleep elsewhere." By the time he left, the sun was already lowering. My first night would be tonight. I tried to focus on the basics, unpacking my bag, checking the locks on the doors and windows, making sure the place was as secure as it could be. But the list of rules kept tugging at the edge of my thoughts. Around 10:30, I filled a glass of water from the kitchen tap and placed it in the center of the dining room table, just as instructed. I wasn't sure if the glass had to be full, but I made sure it was. Then I covered every mirror I could find with sheets or cloth. There were more mirrors in that house than seemed reasonable. Even in the hallway upstairs, there was a tall standing mirror, and I draped it with a blanket until its reflection was swallowed. By 11:00, the house had gone silent, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but watchful. At midnight, I was in the small bedroom I'd chosen on the second floor, reading by the dim glow of a lamp. That's when I heard it. My name. It was faint, like a whisper carried by the wind coming from outside my window. I froze, my pulse kicking hard. I remembered rule number 4. If you hear someone calling your name from outside between midnight and 3 a.m., do not respond. I set my book down, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. But then I heard it again. Louder this time, drawn out in a way that didn't sound quite human. I turned off the lamp and sat in darkness, listening. The voice called again, but now it sounded closer, as if whoever or whatever was outside had moved from the yard to just below my window. I gripped the edge of the bed, every muscle tight, and stayed silent. After a while, the voice stopped. It was almost 2 a.m. when the next thing happened. I heard slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway outside my room. I hadn't heard the front door open. I hadn't heard anyone climb the stairs. Yet someone was walking past my door. I reached for the baseball bat I'd brought with me and stood perfectly still, waiting. That's when I saw it. Through the small crack beneath my door, a shadow passed. It wasn't the shape of a person. It was too tall, the limbs too long, the head angled strangely. My skin crawled as I remembered rule number 6. If you see the figure in the hallway, turn off all the lights and close your eyes until it passes. The lights in my room were already off, so I backed toward the bed and shut my eyes tight. The floorboards creaked just outside my door. I felt it stop there, the silence stretching long enough for my breath to become shallow and painful in my chest. Then it moved on. When the first light of morning broke through the blinds, I went straight to the dining room. The glass of water I placed there was gone. In its place was an empty, wet ring on the table's surface. I searched the kitchen, the sink, even the trash. The glass wasn't anywhere in the house. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just following strange rules for the sake of tradition or superstition. Someone or something was enforcing them. And it was only my first night. The second day began with a fog hanging over Amityville. Even from the upper window of the house, I couldn't see past the front yard. The mist swallowed the street, the trees, everything beyond the property line. It gave the illusion that the house floated in some suspended place, cut off from the rest of the world. I tried to shake off the unease. After all, I had real work to do, dusting the rooms, sweeping the hallways, and making sure the place didn't fall into total disrepair. Mr. Holloway had said he'd check in at the end of the week, and I didn't want him to find an excuse to fire me. Still, as I moved from room to room, I couldn't help glancing at the basement door every time I passed it. It was early morning, and sunlight was spilling into the hallway, but something about that door made the hair on my arms rise. I could almost imagine a faint vibration coming from it, like a heartbeat. By afternoon, the fog had lifted, but the house felt no less isolated. No mail came, no cars passed. Even the neighborhood birds seemed to avoid the yard. I wondered if that was just my imagination or something else entirely. That night I prepared for the rules again. Glass of water on the dining room table by 11 p.m., mirrors covered, all the windows locked. I kept my bat close, the memory of last night's shadow in the hallway still fresh in my mind. Around midnight, the voice returned. It called my name again, this time softer, almost pleading. I kept still, my eyes fixed on the dark window. Then the voice changed. It became my mother's. The first time I heard it, I nearly moved toward the window out of instinct. My mother had passed away 3 years ago, but hearing her voice, gentle, familiar, sent a shock of longing through me. She was saying my name the way she used to when waking me for school. I gripped the blanket and forced myself to stay seated. The rules weren't suggestions. That much was clear. When I didn't respond, the voice stopped. I thought I'd be left alone for the rest of the night, but I was wrong. At about 1:45 a.m., I heard footsteps in the attic. Slow, dragging steps that made the wood groan above me. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to remember if Mr. Holloway had mentioned anyone living up there. He hadn't. He'd only said not to open the attic door. The steps continued, deliberate and heavy, like someone pacing the length of the attic over and over again. Then I heard a dull thud, as though something had fallen. For a long time, I sat frozen, hoping the noise would fade. It didn't. By 2:15, the sound changed. It wasn't just pacing anymore. Something was tapping on the attic floor above me in a steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. It was directly over my bed. I shut my eyes and focused on my breathing, telling myself that as long as I didn't break the rules, I'd be safe. The tapping continued until exactly 3 a.m. when it stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The next morning, I decided to test something. I climbed the narrow staircase toward the attic, stopping at the closed door. The paint around the frame looked more damaged than before, the scratches deeper, fresher. I didn't touch the doorknob, even in daylight. A strange cold air seemed to seep out from under the door, carrying with it a smell that reminded me of damp earth. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. I kept busy to keep my mind from drifting too much toward the attic, but every so often I'd feel as though someone was watching me from just out of sight. On my third night, things escalated. The glass of water was gone again the next morning, same as before, and I decided to stay awake the entire night to see if I could hear or see anything taking it. It was 10:58 when I set the glass down on the dining room table and retreated to the kitchen, the lights low. I sat in the corner with my bat, my eyes fixed on the table. For a long time, nothing happened. The house stayed still. But then, at exactly 11:47, I saw movement in the hallway beyond the dining room. The figure stepped into view. It was the same shadow I'd seen under my door, tall and stretched unnaturally, its head tilted as if studying the room. It moved soundlessly, gliding rather than walking, its limbs too long for its thin body. It stopped at the table. Though its face was nothing more than a black void, I could feel it looking at the glass of water. Slowly, one elongated hand reached out. The moment its fingers brushed the glass, the water inside began to swirl violently, as if caught in a miniature storm. Then, in a single motion, it lifted the glass and tilted it toward where its mouth should be. The water poured into the darkness of its face, vanishing without a sound. When the glass was empty, the figure turned toward me. I froze, gripping the bat tighter, not daring to breathe. It didn't move closer. It only stood there for a few seconds, then turned and slipped back into the hallway, disappearing into the dark. I didn't follow. At dawn, the glass was gone again. By the fourth night, I realized something about the rules. They weren't just precautions. They were instructions for coexisting with whatever lived here. I could survive, but only if I played my part exactly. That morning, however, I made a mistake. In my exhaustion, I left one of the mirrors in the upstairs hallway uncovered after midnight. It wasn't intentional. I'd simply forgotten. The sound woke me first, a faint whispering, almost like a radio tuned to static. I stepped into the hallway and froze. The uncovered mirror no longer reflected me. Instead, I saw the hallway as it was, but with someone standing at the far end. A woman in a long, tattered dress, her hair hanging over her face. She wasn't in the real hallway, only in the reflection. Slowly, she began walking toward me in the mirror. I backed away, my pulse hammering until my shoulders hit the wall. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as though the air itself had thickened around me. She reached the spot in the reflection where I was standing. But in the mirror, she smiled. Her mouth was far too wide. Then she raised her hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. A dark liquid began to drip from her fingertips, running down the surface of the mirror like ink. I yanked the sheet from the banister and threw it over the mirror. The second it was covered, the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came, the mirror's surface was perfectly clean. No ink, no sign of her at all. But deep down, I knew something in the house had noticed my mistake, and it wasn't going to forget. I woke on the fifth morning to find the house colder than it had been before. The chill was sharp enough to sting my lungs when I breathed. The radiators, which had been lukewarm during the other nights, were now ice cold. I made my rounds, checking the windows and doors, but everything was locked. Nothing was broken. Still, the air felt different, heavier, thicker, as though the house itself had woken up in a mood. I couldn't shake the feeling that this shift was tied to my mistake with the mirror. Something about that woman's smile had carved itself into my memory. Even in daylight, I kept expecting to catch a glimpse of her in a reflection I didn't mean to look at. By the afternoon, I was jumpy, flinching at the smallest noises. A floorboard creaking upstairs, the faint rattle of a loose window latch. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the kitchen, but that was when I made the biggest mistake yet. It was nearly sunset, and I was putting away some cleaning supplies when I noticed the basement door slightly ajar. I knew it had been closed earlier. I had made a habit of checking it each day. I froze in the hallway, staring at that small opening. My instinct told me to close it and walk away, but curiosity gnawed at me. What could be so dangerous about the basement after sunset? The sun wasn't fully down yet. There was still a faint glow outside, so I told myself it didn't count as breaking the rule. Just a quick look, just to see. I pushed the door open, and a rush of damp, cold air rolled out, carrying with it a smell that made my stomach twist. Earthy, but sour, like soil that had been soaked in something rotten. The wooden steps descended into a darkness so complete it seemed solid. I flicked the switch on the wall. The light flickered twice and then stayed dim, barely illuminating the first few steps. I could make out the edges of shelves along the walls, lined with jars and boxes. I stepped down, 1 foot at a time, my hand gripping the railing. The air grew colder the further I went, and with each breath, the smell worsened. By the time I reached the bottom, it was strong enough to make my eyes water. The basement floor was concrete, cracked in several places. I ran my flashlight along the walls and stopped. In the far corner was something covered with a large stained sheet. My throat went dry. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. The sheet looked damp at the bottom, clinging to whatever was beneath. I reached for it slowly, but before my fingers touched the fabric, I heard it. A faint, deliberate breathing. Not mine. I froze in place. The sound came from under the sheet, low and steady, like someone trying not to be heard. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I took one slow step back, then another, but the breathing grew louder, faster, almost agitated. Then the sheet moved. Something underneath shifted, rising slightly as if about to stand. I bolted. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was out of the basement and slamming the door shut. I locked it and leaned against it, gasping for air. By the time I checked the clock, the last light outside had vanished. I had been down there right on the edge of breaking the rule, and maybe I had crossed it. That night the house let me know I had. The voice outside returned at midnight, but this time it didn't stay outside. I heard it move from the yard to the porch, then to the hallway just beyond my bedroom. It called my name in dozens of voices. My own, my mother's, my father's, friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one perfect, each one exact. Then the knocking started. Slow, heavy knocks on my bedroom door. I stayed in bed, my eyes locked on the door handle. It rattled once, then went still. But the sound didn't stop. It simply moved. Down the hallway, to the stairs, then to the dining room. I heard the scrape of a chair sliding across the floor. I forced myself to stay put until the sun began to rise. In the morning, I went downstairs to check the dining room table. The glass of water was gone again, but in its place was the sheet from the basement, damp and stained, draped neatly over the chair. There was something small and round resting on top of it. A tooth, human. The rest of the day passed in a haze of dread. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow stretched too long. I barely ate, unable to shake the feeling that I had drawn the house's attention in the worst way. By nightfall, I considered locking myself in my room and refusing to leave until Mr. Holloway came back. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The rules weren't about locking things out. They were about letting certain things in, on the house's terms. At 11, I put the glass of water on the table and returned to my room. I kept the bat close, my ears straining for the first sign of movement. It came sooner than expected. At 12:15, the attic door slammed shut hard enough to shake the walls. I sat up in bed, gripping the bat, but the next sound froze me in place. Footsteps coming down from the attic. They were slow and deliberate, the wood groaning under each step. When they reached the hallway outside my room, I heard breathing. Not the quiet kind I'd heard in the basement, but deep, dragging breaths, like someone who had been running for miles and had finally stopped. Then came the knock. One slow, deliberate knock on my bedroom door. I didn't answer. The second knock was louder. I closed my eyes, remembering the rules. They didn't say anything about knocks, only about voices, mirrors, the attic door. And the basement. I'd already broken that one. The third knock rattled the frame. When I opened my eyes again, I saw something move in the gap beneath the door, a shadow spilling across the floor, thicker than before, writhing like smoke. I backed away until I hit the far wall, my breath coming fast. The shadow reached toward me. And then, silence. When I woke the next morning, I was still sitting against the wall, my bat in hand. The door was open an inch. On the floor, just inside the room, was another human tooth. The house wasn't just watching me anymore. It was marking me, and I had a feeling I knew what for. By the seventh night, I no longer felt like I was living inside the Amityville house. I felt like the house was living inside me. The days were shorter now, or maybe it only felt that way because the sunlight never seemed to fully reach the rooms anymore. Even in the middle of the afternoon, the corners stayed shadowed, and the air carried a faint hum, like something deep in the walls was breathing. I kept replaying my mistakes in my mind, the mirror, the basement. I told myself I wouldn't make another. But the problem was, the house had started bending the rules. It was creating situations that made it impossible not to break them. It began just before sunset. I was upstairs dusting one of the smaller bedrooms when I heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering in the dining room. My stomach sank. The glass of water. I ran downstairs, my footsteps echoing too loudly, and stopped in the doorway. The glass lay in pieces on the floor, the water spreading out like a dark stain on the wood. The figure was standing at the head of the table. It was taller than I remembered, its limbs impossibly thin, its head brushing the low chandelier. This time I could see its face, or what passed for one. Hollow sockets where eyes should be, a mouth stretched too far, and skin that looked like it had been soaked and left to rot. It bent down slowly, running a hand along the water on the floor, then lifting it to its mouth. I backed away, but my heel hit something soft. I turned and saw the sheet from the basement lying in the doorway. I ran. I didn't stop until I was upstairs in my room with the door locked. My breathing was too loud, my heart punching against my ribs. My mind raced. What happens if the glass isn't there by 11 p.m.? The rules didn't say what to do if something removed it early. I thought about going back downstairs to replace it, but the sound of slow footsteps on the stairs told me that wasn't an option. The knocking came next. Not on my door this time, but on the wall behind my bed. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then silence. I stayed awake all night, clutching the bat until my hands cramped. When morning came, I ventured downstairs cautiously. The glass was gone again. In its place was something that hadn't been there before, a small wooden box. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, the way you stare at a coiled snake, waiting for it to strike. The box was about the size of a jewelry case, the wood dark and worn, the latch rusted shut. I told myself not to open it. I told myself it was another trap, but the moment I reached out, the latch broke easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside was a small piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was another rule. 8. If the glass of water is removed before midnight, replace it within 7 minutes, or the house will choose. My stomach turned to ice. I looked at the clock on the wall. It read 7:04 a.m. The glass had been gone for hours. The house had chosen. That night, I put out a fresh glass of water early at exactly 10:30, hoping it might make some difference. At 11:05, I heard something moving in the attic. Not footsteps this time, dragging, like something heavy was being pulled across the floorboards. I ignored it, focusing on the rules. But then a knock came at my door, and this time it was accompanied by a voice. Not just any voice, my own. It was speaking in perfect mimicry, saying things I had never said out loud, secrets I had never told anyone. The sound made my skin crawl. It knew me. I turned off my lamp and sat in the dark trying to block it out. But then the voice changed again. It became my mother's, begging me to open the door, saying she was trapped. I pressed my hands over my ears and kept still. The knob turned once, twice. Then slowly the door creaked open. I could see nothing in the doorway, only darkness, thick and unnatural, spilling into the room like smoke. I gripped the bat, my hands shaking. Something moved inside the blackness, a figure stepping forward, slow and deliberate, its head tilted to one side. Then it whispered, not in my mother's voice, not in mine, but in something older, wetter, and impossibly deep. You broke the rule. Now you belong here. I swung the bat as hard as I could. It passed through the darkness without resistance. The figure didn't even flinch. It only leaned closer until I could feel the cold radiating off it like ice. Then it stepped back into the dark, and the door slammed shut so hard the frame cracked. I stayed awake until morning, my body too tense to rest. When sunlight finally spilled through the blinds, I saw something on my nightstand that hadn't been there before. Another tooth, and this time it was mine. I ran to the bathroom mirror, forgetting to keep it covered. One of my molars was gone, the gum still raw. I didn't remember it happening. I didn't remember sleeping. And for the first time, I realized I might not make it to the end of the week. By the 8th night, I was barely holding on. Sleep had become a dangerous luxury. Food tasted like ash, and every sound in the house carried the weight of intention. The air was heavy, damp, and foul, as if the walls themselves had begun to rot from the inside. I kept telling myself, just survive until Holloway returns. He said a week, but a part of me had started to doubt he was ever coming back. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the caretaker job was never meant to end. That evening, I moved through the house like a prisoner on borrowed time, following the rules with desperate precision. Glass of water at exactly 11, mirrors covered, doors locked, lights low. I kept my bat close and stayed alert. But the house was no longer waiting for me to make mistakes. At 12:14 a.m., every single mirror covering in the house fell at once. I didn't see them come down. I heard it, the simultaneous whisper of fabric sliding off glass, followed by silence so deep it rang in my ears. The rule was broken, and not by me. I stayed in my room at first, refusing to look into any reflection. But the mirrors called to me, not with voices, but with movement, flickers in my peripheral vision, shadows that didn't match the room. Then I saw it. The mirror across the hall, uncovered and waiting, showed a hallway identical to mine, except for one detail. Something was walking toward me in it. It was the woman from before, her tattered dress trailing on the floor, her hair hiding her face. But in the reflection, her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on frayed strings. I shut my door, but the sound of her footsteps continued, crossing the hall toward my room. The knob rattled once, twice. Then it began to turn. I shoved the dresser against the door and backed away, my hands shaking. The rattling stopped. Then came the voice. You don't need to run anymore. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't mine. It was the house. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. A deep, slow knock pounded the wall right behind my head. Then another. Then the sound of the dresser sliding by itself away from the door. The door swung open. The hallway outside wasn't the hallway anymore. It was the basement. The cracked concrete floor, the damp air, the sour smell. And in the far corner, the sheet from before was gone, revealing something crouched in the shadows. It was Holloway. Or at least what used to be him. His skin was stretched tight over bone, his eyes cloudy, his mouth slack. His fingers twitched like they were trying to remember how to move. I stepped back into my room, but the floor under my feet was wet. The water spread quickly, cold and deep enough to cover my shoes. I looked down and saw the glass from the dining room floating beside my ankle, full to the brim. A voice whispered from the dark water, "Drink." I shook my head. My throat was dry, but every instinct screamed not to touch it. The water rose higher, swirling around my legs. I stumbled back against the bed, the bat still in my grip. Holloway, or the thing wearing him, was closer now, crawling toward me on hands and knees, his jaw opening too wide. The lights flickered. The air thickened. The rules didn't matter anymore. I swung the bat at him, the crack echoing like a gunshot, but when I looked, he was gone. The water was gone, too. I was standing in the dining room. The table was set for dinner, candles lit, plates arranged, silverware polished. And across from me sat the figure, its head tilted, its black eyes fixed on mine. In front of it was the glass of water. It slid the glass toward me. I backed away, but the chair behind me pulled itself out, urging me to sit. The walls seemed to close in, the room stretching longer and narrower, until the only way forward was toward the table. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. Its voice seeped into my head, not through my ears. You take the glass, or you take the room. I knew what that meant. The house wanted me to drink, to let it in completely. My hands shook as I reached for the glass, but at the last second, I threw it to the floor. The water didn't spill. Instead, it crawled upward, defying gravity, shaping itself into arms, into a face, my own face. It smiled at me, and then it lunged. The cold hit me like a punch to the chest, forcing me back into the chair. I gasped for air, but swallowed only freezing water. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me. When I woke, I was sitting at the table alone. The glass was full again. The candles were out. Outside, morning light touched the windows. I thought maybe I'd survived the night, until I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. It smiled back at me, and I wasn't smiling. If you've made it this far, maybe you've already broken the first rule: never listen to the end. The house remembers you now, and it never forgets. If you want to hear more stories the world wishes would stay buried, make sure you subscribe before the lights go out. Until next time, keep your doors locked and your eyes open.